Hi guys, welcome again. This is Tony Leonard, sitting in on ZBrush Live, and going to be getting started here soon. Just getting a few things set up and squared away, and we will begin here shortly. Today, I'm going to probably go about an hour and a half, starting here at the 4 o'clock hour. And I probably will go into about an hour and a half. Unfortunately, today I have to cut things a little bit short due to some work that I have to really pressingly get to. But let's have some fun here. So just give me just a second to get things started up, and we will be underway. Of course, let me know in the chat if you guys can hear me, and I'm going to try to get started here in just a moment. I'm not sure if, but it may be the case on the actual Twitch channel that titles might be out of whack, but just to mention again, I am Tony Leonard, concept artist based out of Los Angeles, California, sitting in on this session, and I'm going to be doing some stuff using ZBrush and maybe a few other tools, doing some hard surface stuff, and I was just going to do sort of a free session this weekend, and sort of pick up from a few other topics that were in last stream. So give me just a moment. Sorry, just getting things set up and underway. Right. Oh, sweet. Sweet, sweet, sweet. The bot caught the title. Awesome. Alright. Alright. Almost set. There we go. Sorry, I'm just getting some of the extra chat stuff so that I can monitor and answer questions from all sources here. So just give me 1 second, and then we'll get underway. And of course, if anything should be amiss audio-wise, please let me know, and I'll try to fix things out. You guys hear me okay? Sweet. Awesome. Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to switch screens here. There we go. All right. Even with me, I have my small thumbnail so you can see the great expressions on my face. Okay, there we are. Alright, hope everybody's having a great weekend so far. So let's pick up and do some things. I thought I would come in and maybe demo for you guys some of the brushes that I made for you guys last time around. If you recall, I was making some sort of hard surface oriented brushes that I was eventually going to share with some of you, and I did the work and put them together. And so I wanted to have some fun with them in here and show you guys kind of what you can do with them. So oh, sweet. Just 1 second here. Trying to figure out. Ah, great. Awesome. Okay, I can see you guys in every chat. So if you have any questions, of course, give me a shout out in the chat. Let me know that everything's working correctly, and let me know if you asked a question. I have things off to the side, so just let me know if I missed your question, and I'll try to answer it as soon as I can. So I kind of came through and built some things in ZBrush. So I'm just going to lay down a cube just as a proxy for a moment, and then I'm going to get started here. Make Polymesh 3D. There we go. And so I made for you guys a brush, and I hope everybody's a series of brushes actually, and the full collection I'm gonna actually sell on Gumroad, and they've already been put up, but there is a test brush that I've made available through my donation box on Gumroad, and I actually intend to maybe put it up on ZBC for you guys so that you can try it out and demo the pieces. And they're sort of my collected KB 2018 brushes, which stands for Kit Bash, of course. But just some of the things that you can do, as I was speaking and showing you guys last time through Fusion. I've made a series of brushes, maybe just like a few hard surface parts, and this is pretty much part of one of the collections. There's a most sort of like a mech insert brushes that you can use. They are IMMs, so of course when you bring up the brush by its title, TL 2018 KB, you can sort of push M and look through the host of meshes and see how many there are, and the shapes that are involved. I think through its initial pass, most of them should be aligned pretty correctly, but you might get a brush or two here in the set that some of the axis is maybe slightly off when they're applied, but I think they're more like non-essential parts by then. But I created these brushes so that I could offer you guys shape language to use. So in other words, like they don't have a horrible amount of detail, but say for example, if I was to start to maybe put down a few of them, I'm just holding shift and drawing the mesh onto something as a proxy. But as you can see, they're really neat, clean pieces. Some of them have very low amounts of detail so that you guys can come in and add your own sort of like a surface design and noise, or connected joints or what have you. But because of the gizmo being added to ZBrush, you can do some really nifty placement and design choice things to just even a simple proxy mesh and come up with sort of a silhouette of your own. So with something like this, say I'm going to flip over back to the normal transpose for a second. Just do this. And I'm going to rotate these down. Maybe just about there. And rotate it inward. And I'm going to use the move tool by using W, same transpose. But in just the same way, I could use anything like probably the gizmo must be better for placement, but sometimes just to nail things down in a basic way, I use the transpose a lot. So I'm just going to take a few minutes and maybe build something, see kind of just have some adventure time and kind of come up with a sketch of things. So let's see, I think I have a nice little chassis piece in here somewhere. And of course you can flip through some of these objects in insert multi-mesh mode. As long as you're on the transpose and or the world space gizmo tool, I believe, you can actually swap out inserts. So like my UI is awful. I kind of keep it a little bit stock. I don't really tweak it too much. But yeah, I mean, I keep the colors sort of low impact, just easy on the eyes, and the rest of the tools I just go digging for them. I'm not a super customized person, but sorry if it, you know, bothers anyone, or maybe a little confusing. So then I just tend to keep a split mast, and that way I can break things apart. So I just kind of want to make like a sort of gesture sketch. So I'm going to use this cube and recycle it a little bit. Going back to Q, picking another part. And it's always kind of an interesting thing. I think I've mentioned this before, but sometimes when you create your own kit bashes to use as insert multi-meshes, it really pushes you to drive your own shape language to design something. And I think being able to have something that you can explore sort of as a base, when you do the parts yourself, it looks more consistent a lot of times, and that's sort of like a cool thing that I like to do when I'm designing stuff. So eventually I'll probably get rid of the cube, keep all of the framework that's being laid down, and so I'm just using this as sort of a base proxy. You know? Let's see, I want to take and do it like this. Maybe bring this up short. This part, lift this guy up a little bit. That should be fine. Alright. And then I will take some other panel parts and size them up. So a lot of times, you guys have seen me do this before, especially with hard surface stuff, is I like to take, sometimes working with primitives and or working with some of the inserted primitives and add shapes and customize those shapes by the poly. So usually a lot of using the IMM primitives, using B, I, and then right here IMM primitives. And a lot of times I'll use a lot of these base shapes, especially the Q cube and sometimes some of the cylinders, to draw up some new shapes and stuff like that I can use. But we'll go back here and choose the shape that I was working with before. And so, just like you saw, I can kind of swap out some parts and whatnot. So I'm just going to line this one up. Again, let me know if you have any questions, because I think probably I'm going to sculpt for a bit and get lost in it, and yeah, it's kind of almost like layers. Like if you use like a control shortcut keys in Photoshop a lot, and you know use the vignette tool and sort of right click your spot or your layer and just jump to it, a lot of times it's almost very much like the same thing. I also like when I have a lot of tools, I'm in draw mode sometimes, just using the Q key. and then I just use Alt and just jump in between some of these subtools. So as I lay them down, I can sort of jump through the list. So sort of an old shortcut key, but still there, still much appreciated, because you can, you know, once you stack a lot of these things together, a lot of them start to really pile up, and you can kind of figure out what is joined with what, and you know, sort it out. So I'm gonna jump over here, split masked points again. Come over. Let's see. I think I'll take this guy. Come down here. Roll that up. Size where I want it. And of course, toggle using for world space. Yes, you could scale it up. I'm actually just sketching just ad lib, so of course some scaling stuff would be necessary, especially if you're moving somewhere else. But I'm just sketching things out, so I'm not overly concerned with scale a whole lot. You can hold Alt with the gizmo and turn it, reorient yourself. There we go. That'll work. So I'm not going to worry too much about the complex joints, but I just wanted to get like some more of the like sort of basic pose, and I'll just block it out using shapes. Yeah, kit bashing essentially. Only in this case, I'm using a lot of my own kit bash pieces more and more these days. Like sometimes it's great to use those of other designers, and even just sort of break some of that topology down and like redo it, whatever your desired shape is going to be. But I always think it's fun to make your own, and that way you keep a consistent look to your own sort of sensibilities. And so, you know, blocking out becomes sort of a familiar process, but you explore new shapes by bending up and sort of building up a silhouette on your own. So, like, say for example, if I wanted the legs a certain shape, and while I'm still in a thinking process, I can always kind of come back and change up a material. Maybe something like there's an outline here. You can take sort of something like this and make it really basic, change the document background color. Let's see, something maybe a little bit lighter, turn the range down. And with certain like black fills, you could just sort of overall look at the shapes. It's just something I always like to do to sort of, I mean, this one puts an outline on it, so it almost makes it look like a 2D artwork with a lot of heavy contrast, so which is really nice to have the choice to do that. Outline thin is a little bit thinner, and depending on the light sources of what you have, some of those contours will be picked up and some won't. So it's a nice little like silhouette building exercise. You can see overall form and how some of the smaller forms connect and come together. So it really is kind of like a design choice thing where, you know, all the little crumbs that make up the cake come into play. All right. So again, of course, finally, I'm not going to probably have a block necessarily for the pelvis, but we'll try it out. So every time I build some pieces, like kit bash sets, the more and more I build them, the more and more they sort of stack up and become something like a guide or a catalog, personal catalog of parts, some of which are used for different purposes at different times, but it's always good to have them. So right now I have a piece usually I use for shoulders and joints, but I'm going to use it sort of like a pelvis joint. Let's see here. Raise this up a little bit. And I'm going to resize it, but I want to turn on... one thing to be careful of sometimes with using the gizmo is when you are scaling up or making objects larger, without LSN turned on, it's probably not going to do it. It's going to do it more globally than locally, and so it's going to push the geometry outward and away from the center of wherever your axis is. For this, I'm just going to use LSN and resize it in place so that it's local. All right. And then do another split. And then I have these parts in solo, so move this about. Drop this down perhaps. Maybe a little more forward. And of course I'm going to have to move some of the leg parts, but gives you an idea of kind of a general gesture. Click here. There we go. There we are. I'll push these out just a tad. This and actually rotate it so that heavier lock part is at the bottom a little bit more. There we go. That could be fun, giving some space and some clearance. You'll probably have a wide stance and a very large pelvic joint so that all the mechanics can move. There we go, a little quick save. So building a little bit more of it out. So one of the other things that I did is it's not just a one brush per se. I actually sell on Gomberg a bundled edition of both of my sets, but in the set that is bundled right now, other parts that I've built in the set, there's 4 different brushes, and so there's some really cool stuff in there if you have a look. But there's also cowling pieces, so outer armor shells, and with that, kind of took and built some ideas of shells. So just like basically on the inside parts, you have some mechanic brushes to use, and then again on the outside parts, there are extra armor pieces laid out inside to use as well. So you can kind of mix and match and create new design. Maybe use them as a concept mesh, and a lot of these they're not sub D geometry. Most of them are going to be probably triangulated, meaning if you were to probably retopologize them, you might want to try doing something like either Z-remeshing or maybe dynameshing and Z-remeshing the parts just to clean them up a little bit and then prepare them for like a hard surface retopology. But they are pretty easy to use, and you know, some of them might actually be decimated, especially around some of the shells. Anything with like crazy curvature, you know, to the shape, you can take and do something like this. Maybe swap this one out if I can. Let's see here. There we go. So I can easily replace and see what looks good. And I can think of this as sort of like an exterior piece later on. I can sort of do a little bit of resizing. And, you know, it's always crazy doing things this way because, I mean, you know, kit bashing is one thing, but in a sort of design sense where you're trying to change things up. Using existing contours to come up with something new is sometimes like a puzzle or a nice design challenge to try to follow along. So do try it. I think I'm going to use this piece in and around here. See, crazy thing is I actually use this piece here, which is an extra leftover piece from a design for like a mech foot, and I'm totally using it, bastardizing, using it for something else entirely. So you never know. Sometimes just good shapes, they just kind of fall into place. Sometimes, you know, you just use it to sort of find your way. Split mask points from there. But this originally this piece here actually started as a mech foot, which I've also included in the full version of the kit. And so just for placement, let's try it out. See if I can nail off the feet there. So at least I have an idea of sort of like some structure and some armature. Ah, no. Thank you. Thanks for joining me. Really appreciate it. I'm actually going to be a little busier here in the coming weeks, so I may not be on as often, but I'll certainly join in and be sure to answer some questions whenever I can. See if we can flatten this out a little bit. There we go. That might work partially. I think I might have to move some of these around a little bit better for the foot, but a little tweaking here and there, putting it together. But yeah, these things like this are what you probably saw me working on last stream that I was in. I think that was probably about 2 weeks ago, and I was working them up in Fusion at the time. So whenever you see these, I have probably generated most of them so that they don't have any crazy holes or anything, because sometimes even triangulated meshes, they don't come out right inside of ZBrush. And there might be a few finicky points where you might have to fix some of your geometry sometimes when you try it out for yourself. But for the most part, most of the bevels and everything are tied up in a really tight network of triangulation. So some of these faces, just to display them properly, they're all closed up. So if I was to show you what it looks like, this main piece, like a lot of these main pieces, believe it or not, these were made entirely in ZBrush, and then the smaller bevel parts or areas I used Fusion for. So you can take, like, say, simple blockouts of quadded geometry. Oh yeah, the LSIM. LSIM is a good one, because especially with using Gizmo, like if you're using ZBrush to kit bash some stuff together, LSIM will do local scaling and symmetry. So, I think something to keep in mind. But as I was mentioning, a lot of these larger parts, the block of the foot, was just a really quick draft inside of ZBrush as a QQ. And then once I had the shapes down that I kind of wanted to generally start cutting up, I took the quad geometry over to Fusion, and I believe it's importing it as like you have to insert it. And I think you have to change over some B-rep to mesh or mesh to B-rep, probably messing around with those two to get it someplace where you can edit it. and at times it will do funny things with the geometry, so be careful. But let's see. Put this a little bit more forward. There we go. Shift F, back to Q. See how that looks. So as you can see, probably we're working much larger than the actual floor. So I'm guessing that if I was to move this over to Maya or something, it might be quite large. And the same for Keyshot. Now, a lot of times you see me working from the box proxy that I had as placement. So in other words, I used this box just an inserted polymesh. So I started the project just with a cube drawn on the surface, and then I make polymesh 3D so that I can start editing things or using insert multi-mesh brushes or start sculpting. I place things on that, but I use the split masked points, which is not normally up here. I actually have a bit of a custom interface, and so I'll take these and actually, start breaking them up one by one. And the reason why I do this, I mean, they're merged similar parts, but the reason I do this is because a lot of times while I'm concepting, I'll come over, as you've seen me do before, let's see, over to the render tab, and then external render, and if you have the ZBrush to Keyshot bridge, just to see how things get lit well, or what kind of material use you might want to use, I'll go ahead and BPR it, right? And when I BPR it, it actually sets up sort of like cached files to send over, almost in the same fashion as GoZ, over to Keyshot 7. Or whichever version of Keyshot you happen to be using. Alright, I'm going to take a sip of coffee here. Excuse me. I can set real-world units, I believe. Scaling has always been an issue. Sometimes things get a little picky between, like, say, Maya scaling, or if you're scaling to max. Sometimes making yourself or generating yourself, or if you're working in a pipeline, say for production, having a ruler of some sorts, or setting up geometry in one app and then bringing it over, sort of demarcating the measurements, is a good idea. In fact, it's not uncommon. So that way, sometimes whichever pipeline or whoever you're working with can set scale. I would probably suggest making sort of like a stacked box, for example, and then marking each increment of measurement. It's hard for me to explain, but there are measurement points using the tick lines in transpose, and you can actually customize those. But generally, I just grab things and then I adjust scale to past where I'm going. So usually I have some other object as a reference point a lot of times. Does that answer your question a little bit? I believe for Aestheticus. The black background in Keyshot. Here, actually, let me kick this over one. Give me 1 sec, I'll show you. It's pretty easy. Just go into the prefs, I believe. Alright, so I kicked that over, and I'll full screen this. And so this is just a simple setup inside of Keyshot. Move this down a little bit. There we go. And then at least this way you get some better shadows and some better lighting to see forms in the object. But to answer your question, Ermaga, I believe? Ermga? Let's see. Preferences and interface, and I use the theme dark. Right? Should change everything in the UI as well. And then just save changes, and boom, there you go. Let me know if that works. So from here, as you know, Keyshot uses a lot of HDRI lighting, so I'm going to take maybe a few environments that I have made myself. Always love to use my own customs. Strangely enough, let me see if I can actually find it. I'm not sure. There are probably a couple of different types of 3D cameras, but for me, I actually have a Note 8 and I use it with a Gear 360 camera, something like this. And I go out into the real world sometimes, you know, interesting places that I might think of, take a little road trip and shoot HDRIs using this thing, which you can probably use anywhere. You just have to take the photos off of the camera in 360 and convert them over to HDR radiance files in Photoshop, and boom, you can make your own HDRIs, which is pretty awesome. I know there's probably maybe a few other exposure bracketing tools and some other cameras, like Ryko makes a really good one. Forget the model number off the top of my head, but you can actually use it to make HDRIs. So I'm going to try to use one here and drag and drop it on, and it gives me a little bit more real-world lighting. And because I don't want to catch, you know, I mean, I basically stuck the camera out of the car window, stopped in the middle of traffic, and just got like some really nice lighting from an intersection, but it wouldn't actually work if I was to comp something up like this. So a lot of times what I do is, once I have the lighting from the environment or placed HDR, I just come over to environment and I'll pick like a nice background color. So that way I can keep some of the light, but you know, if I'm presenting or something, I can still just, you know, put like a light gray background. Press OK. And then I might actually change a few other things, like you know, if I want ground shadows a little bit lighter, I'll alter those. Lighting inside of the camera, a lot of times I make it custom. I'll do something like changing the shadow quality all the way up, and then lowering some of the ray bounces so that it's a little bit faster. So I'll cut it in half at 3. And then of course, for some of the lighting stuff, show full screen. Not bad. Okay. That's the geometry view. So maybe I can try to place some just key materials on here. See what things look like. An older material that has a little bit of an error to it. Let's play around with it. Some of these, I've noticed that if you have really dense geometry, not in the way of like, say, like a Dynamesh, but if you have anything that has like some faceting or triangulation, every once in a while you might get some problems displaying things that have curvature maps in them. So that's why if I render this out and I preview it, I'm just previewing it to see what the materials look like, sort of doing a little bit of look development. But you'll see where sometimes it picks up some of the faceting. Things like this can be rendered if like you take a proxy of it and maybe Dynamesh it at a very high resolution, and then maybe even ZBrush it and then project back. It'll probably even out or average some of the smoothing of the normals, and you'll not get this sort of faceted edge where it's picking up the absolute edge of each face. So I know sometimes that can be problematic, or something if you're doing a concept of something, you might want to paint it out. But that's what that is, just to let you know. Of course, I can change other materials. Have a look at your scene. Sometimes when I break up the subtools, they're all listed here. So if you're new to Keyshot, usually it kicks over your model, but you can be able to part it out and grab in the scene, or while the scene tab is selected, you can grab individual pieces and just add like a material specifically to those. So just to let you know. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually hold the Alt key and drag and drop the material onto the geo. Try that maybe. And yes, I will link it. And then giving it a sec, I'll roll back, sort of see what things look like. sort of a chipped paint. Maybe try something else. No, that's not going to work too good. Let's see. I have another that's really good from Frederick Douse. I think I've used his material before in here. So I'll try to put it in there. A little too glossy maybe. Let's just drag it on and see what happens. Redo this. If the parts are renamed in Keyshot, will the name changes carry over to ZB? I have never tried that. Usually naming things, for example, let me go back to ZBrush really quick. What I'll do is I'll just go through and go down the line and select each one, say for this way, for example, and then just rename them here. So I'll say right? And I'll just give each unique item a name, and then those can carry over. So if I hit BPR again, hey, how's it going? And kick it back over, it should change it, right? So probably somewhere in the list, it'll be renamed. Here, actually, let's save this really quick. Save a project. What's today? 16th. 16. Oops. There we go. So I'll save the project, which saves all the tools, of course, and then I can just keep on going. So I'll get rid of the floor, keep the dynamic. I'll adjust it by the angle of view. By default, it's a 50 a lot, but generally I'll change it. Oops. To something like 35, and then I get more of a straightforward view. So let's see here. Of course, you know, using all of this as a base, you can create your own concept mesh over something like this and just use like these parts as sort of like an inner skeleton, which is always really nice because sometimes, let's say for example, I'm going to append a sphere. I'm going to turn off symmetry really quick. I'm going to grab the sphere, bring it down. Actually, it should be on this side because this should be the actual true X, right? If I was to turn on floor, this red line indicating that this is the X, right? So if I try to do any type of mirroring welding, I'm going to start from this side and have it kicked over to its left-hand side. And then I'll take something like this and I'll make it like a low dynamesh. That way I can do some sketching of shapes over the top, right? So I'm going to go ahead and hide that, hide that, hide that, dynamesh, and I'll try to do something low, like 32, and I'll turn polish on, no blur, project is fine, and I'll dynamesh it, right? Easy enough. And that way I can come in with a big move tool and make some drastic changes. There we go. I can sort of push pull. So if I wanted a new cowl shape or something like that, I can just simply sculpt it up. Just build up some mass and change my silhouette. And later I would just have like plans on taking something like this and I'll use like trim dynamic, regular, you know, poly sculpting tools, H polish, you know, trim dynamic, that sort of thing. I'll shape it up. Especially if you wanted something a little bit more contoured. Let's see. I'll grab like a also clip curve brush. Even if I angle it. And I'm clicking Alt to get sort of a Belgier curve out of it. And it flattens geometry, so it gives me a nice flat surface, and then I just redynamesh, keep sculpting. Let's see. Let's do a little sketch on it. Then that way I can keep a little bit of track of some shapes that I want. So really, like, the Dynamesh piece just becomes like, again, a proxy or a sketch over something, and then I can build that up into an actual shape that I want to use. And a lot of times, you know, of course, for those of you for a long time who've used the Damien standard brush, which I think has been updated. Actually, the guy has Damien, the gentleman Damien who created it. I believe he has an updated version of it on his Gumroad, so it's worthy to try to go take a look at it. But I like to use it not only to carve in, but also carve out of meshes, and so sort of creating like surface plateaus or planar changes in the mesh. I'll use clay a lot, like clay buildup, which sometimes you can use in a rough way, just if you're sculpting in something like this to give clay mass. But you could also kind of come over into your brush, not stroke, sorry, brush, and under modifiers, you can change these a lot. So one of the things that you can do to change the look, I like to get it in smooth. So between 1 and 2 of smoothness, you can just add like really soft buildup of clay, and then I flatten it down using something like hard polish. To sort of mash out the shape that I'm trying to achieve. Sorry for the motorcycle noises. Apparently I live on a raceway. So here we go. There we are. We'll get the move brush. Move this around a little bit. Want to have sort of almost a Gundam-esque pull, or like a hard surface pant leg kind of thing going on here. And then once I build the mass, I'll redynamesh it and then carve it out. go. This way, and I'll even out some of these planar shapes a little bit, just using the trim dynamic, flatten it out. So kind of almost like akin to drawing or sketching, which I also do quite a bit, but I can come and sort of like draw out my shapes, sort of develop them from the ground up, and do like to do that quite a bit. So let's see here. Oops. Do that. Oops. Thought I would take this and clip it just a little bit to add a shape, but there we go. Yeah. So while I'm a bit lost in it, if anybody has, again, any questions, please let me know. I will try to answer, or otherwise, oops, work them out. Hey. There we go. Right now I am not streaming as much as I have previously. In my own private Twitch channel, it's been actually a minute since I've streamed, just because I haven't had the time to do it as much as I'd like to. But here on ZBrush, historically I've done it maybe a couple of times a month, probably twice a month, I believe, whenever I can get scheduled. And so it's like a pretty, I would say that it's fairly consistent that I'm here, but probably, I think at base, probably about twice a month. Let's see. I'm gonna probably be a little brutal with this mesh, like, it's not. Either go back a few steps. I'm gonna try to carve it out. I think I took 2 weeks and built a complete kit, and there's a few more that I have yet to talk about. Actually, there's 4 small sets in the entire bundle, most of which I did in Fusion, and some I actually decimated and had done in ZBrush itself. But there's a couple of others that I developed with a friend of mine, Master Xeon 1001. Was a friend of mine, and we developed a couple of other brushes together. One of which is sort of like an insert brush that I'll probably soon talk about, and it's kind of what we call a CV insert. I mean, it just basically takes and applies a mesh, and then it plucks it right out and sort of inserts the mesh without really destroying the entire mesh that you're applying it to. It kind of puts like an extra loop around it with a polish, and so I think it's called like a micro polish or something like that. And so it usually works out pretty well. And then I made some fabric insert brushes, which are kind of fun to mess around with, as I had been sort of studying Marvelous Designer a bit and wanted to come up with something that was like a sort of like a tiled organic cloth brush of the sort. Alright, so I'm going to re-mesh this. Should have left in a little bit more clay there. Cropped it too big. But not sure why, but thickness was bad. So cropped it a little bit too close to the edge, but I'm just gonna leave it for now because I just want the overall shape of the thing, so that I can come through and just put like a retopo on it or something like that, just like a basic retopo, and then just take the shell from it, or using sort of like a method that I talked about before, where I can just pluck shapes out. So I'm just taking the surface and then just like group loop it, and then ZBrush it out, and then you have like this nice shell left over to work from. But some of the other brushes actually looked like this, where actually this is the small sampler that I think I put together for you guys. There's a couple. These are the shells, and then there's a few shell pieces in the demo brush that I made. So it's sort of a shortened version of it, but I also made some cloth pieces like this here, in which you could probably change some of these into alphas and or displacements, but they're paths. And so in certain design elements, you know, like if you want like something that is more padded, you could put something and apply it like this. And these were made in Marvelous Designer. Just inflated and designed some patterns, and then I can crop these and use these as fit, or change them into displacements, you know, depending on what you're doing. And then, you know, you can use them. I have some hex patterns, more inflated type of material, triangle shapes, so you can sort of dance between these and just check them out. And some of them are high and a little bit low, but some of them have a little bit more, or is it reft setting to it. Yeah, and it makes for nice sort of like cloth elements, you know, if you want to wrap it around. There should be a way also, I have to reinvestigate this again, but when using some of these, if you use them as inserts, there's a way to sort of apply it, I believe somewhere in the brush settings. See if I can find it again. If you turn projection, I believe is what it is, all the way up when you apply it. Where was it? I'm trying to remember where it was. Now I can't remember. But I believe if you turn projection on the brush all the way up, it will try to shape around the No, unfortunately, ZBrush is not free. However, there is a free version of ZBrush that I know of. I believe it's called the ZBrush Core, which I got to try out a little while back ago. I actually have a license, so I haven't used it in depth, but it's sort of like a light version of ZBrush that you can try to use to, you know, maybe get some of the basics down. And it's its own independent version, but I would try it. So definitely look into ZBrush Core. Yeah, they sort of changed some things in and around the last update, so I think the price went slightly up a little bit, but it's still a great bargain. Why? Because if you buy, I bought ZBrush probably back in 4.04 and then again at 4.05, and every upgrade since has been of no charge. It's been a free upgrade. So I think if you look at the long-term value in it, there is some value. So it's something to consider before you pick it up, but there is that. Alright, I'm going to actually use this not here. Delete that and go back to my shape. And I want to work this up, so I'm going to actually flip it over. So I'm going to come down to geometry and mirror and weld it in the modify topology. Oops. Got to remember to turn this off. LSIM, if you have it on, it will locally mirror it and it will mess the piece up a little bit. So just turning off LSIM and then hitting mirror and weld again should kick the shape over to the other side. And I can keep working. Alright. A subscription-based model, I am not actually sure. I have not checked the pricing in a bit, just because I haven't been in the position of buying ZBrush or another license for ZBrush, but I would take a look in the store and see what type of purchasing models that they have. Yeah, but there you can pay like 20-30 euros a month. I couldn't say for sure. Sorry about that. I would definitely, if you could, contact someone over at ZBrush to shoot them an email and ask them. But I believe probably in the store their current models of sale is probably pretty laid out. There we go. Yes, Sculptress Pro, I believe there might be a version of Sculptress that is free. I could be wrong. Don't quote me on that. But I think both are up on their store. If you choose to have a look. So something like this, where I'm using a Damien standard, I'm just basically using it to sort of draw on a mesh and create sort of a sketch that's shaped out. I sort of try to use it just like I do a pencil or something like that. So again, I'm going to take this and do another mirror and weld because I forgot to turn symmetry on. I actually added a subdivision level just to get some detail in, but I'm not really married to it, so I'm just going to delete lower and go ahead and try it again. And once I have that, I'm just going to have a look. I'm actually going to get rid of a few parts here. Let's see. carve that in. So a lot of this will look probably a little rough, but I'm just trying to make an attempt to get some contoured shapes that I want to use. No, I don't always, I don't actually rig a lot myself. I use ZBrush mostly for concepting, so I do a lot of static 2D meshes, but I mean, when I get the chance, I'll sometimes go through and put down topology for stuff to make it a little bit more simple, you know, like more like a production mesh, or like a sort of middle ground or mid poly game style mesh. And then I'll put those in a render, which a lot of times, depending on the quality of the render, like, you know, if I was trying things out in Octane or something else, I would have to put UVs on it, and so I'll take it outside of ZBrush and do a lot of like, you know, hard UVing, using Unfold or like Hedis or something like that, and then I'll take the parts and bring them back with UVs and render it. Or a lot of times, sometimes I also use texture programs like Substance or Quixel, and I'll put like more proper UVs on something like that. But I've actually been working with a couple of friends who are great riggers and animators, and trying to actually put some things together so that I can bring a little bit more life to some designs by making them move, animating them. I myself don't rig very well. I haven't really tried it. I think it's one of those things that I put on my checklist of things to, you know, move into from just simply sculpting or drawing something. So not as of yet. Sure. You can, of course, always catch a lot of what I do, not only on my Instagram feed, which, if you are on Instagram, you can follow me as Tonikoro. That's Tonikoro. And I'll just show you the link to my Instagram blog. And I'm also up on ArtStation as well. All right. So a lot of work that I've done, I've posted up here. For example, and as I do a lot of stuff, work in progress, I'll post these things here. And yeah, do have a look. It's pretty cool stuff. A lot of my illustration efforts as well, I'll post up online. Little life tidbits as well. But I'll also show you something like this. I have my own site on ArtStation, of course, where I post a lot of things. I've been posting some more recent stuff, but there's some things in the middle that I really need to post. So a lot of my 3D and also 2D stuff is all here up online. Model-wise, like like we were just speaking of, if you wanted to see something that I've actually UV'd and textured out, I have a couple of models that have like the Marmoset viewer files up, and so you can go through and take a look at some of the textures and the actual topology and some of the maps that were involved. So it's really cool. I love doing these. because you can always full screen it, and you can actually interact with some of the environment a little bit, so you can sort of move some of the lighting around. This was a model that was pretty complex that I did a couple of years ago, and it was for a class. It actually has some pivot points set via marmoset so that I could sort of get past exposing a few areas that were a little bit underexposed, like where the geometry didn't pair up exactly, because when I designed it, I sort of shelled it out, and it didn't. I think I made certain geometrical cuts to the back of the helmet to make it fit, and so I fixed it so that you're not really truly looking up the back of his helmet. So things like that you can sort of adjust, but this is all using, of course, PBR materials out of Quixel. I believe Quixel Suite 2, and so there are a full range of maps and various materials. It looks a little bit different than, say, in the marmoset environment, because of course there is the situation of compression. So some of the gloss and some of the actual look and feel of, like, say, hard metals versus plastics, sometimes they get a little wonky, just because the maps have been downsized so that they'll stream over OpenGL, using the web browser. But you can also look at things this way, so like normal maps, these are the normals, and of course it changes, the color change that you're seeing is represented by light that's being moved around. So if I move the light around, that's why some of the normal changes are taking place there. But normal, albedo, so it's like the color map, and then you have something like also the reflectivity, which is usually like gloss maps and whatnot. All of the hard reflections are represented in these light gray areas, and then of course they're scaled in values, so sometimes when they get darker they're less reflective, and then over to the white scale, like all of these edges are actual like specular points, right? And of course, in Quixel Suite, a lot of times what you can do is you can paint in your own materials or customize your materials, your base materials yourself. And so, like, a lot of these sort of light, dusty areas are actually edge reflections that I painted into the curvature map. And then, of course, they're showing through in the reflectivity, right? So there's gloss, and then there's the topology. So something like this is where I took the geometry and I literally started cutting along the seam and pelting it out so that they're flat, and then I have no, so that I can sort of circumvent some stretching and whatnot. A lot of times, a lot of UV programs, they show in either blue or red, and red is where you're getting some stretching, and blue is a little bit more optimal, on the optimal side, with less stretching. And of course, there's mapping and stuff like that. It gets deep the further it goes, but great stuff to try and learn. But this is just an example of something that I'll do. And also, on my YouTube channel, I actually have a couple of videos where I work in progress of this, so it's worth having a look and seeing. But yeah, I think I have some shots of this on YouTube. And the actual full render, usually I can put a few more like post effects in, so like nice bloom and noise, put in some fog, and it really starts to shine through when you look at it. Like everything here was created inside of ZBrush, right? So mostly all of the sculpting and concepting for the figure, and there's actually more to the figure. There's an entire suit, but I just need to go back and have a good go at updating it and putting in the legs. The legs as of yet have been unseen, and a lot of the decals as well that were in this. I should probably pull this in, let you guys look. You notice there were probably some decals, and if anybody's curious, the decal work was done in Adobe Illustrator and then placed inside of the diffuse maps. Yeah, mostly just using a lot of the sculpting tools inside of ZBrush, and then of course I probably did some base retopology inside of here, and then also used Maya as well. So Maya, Hedis, Unfold 3D, Quixel Suite, combined with all of those is how I did this model at the time. I think this was about when Quixel Suite 2 was just released, and I was trying to test it out and do some really cool stuff with it. But along this line is, you know, of course I can put textures on it, and because it's in an A pose, I could probably have somebody rig it and then, you know, put motion to it a little bit better, right? Does that answer part of your question? Is that real? Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, I had a lot of fun creating this one. Ah, Maya. Yeah, I'm actually moving away from Maya, as it were. I think I announced on Facebook a little bit. No bad to the boys over at Autodesk, but I wanted to try an experiment with a few other tools for. Yeah, maybe something that's a little bit more cheaper on the model, but there are some things as far as like performance that I want to try and do things in a different way, and also, you know, just different tools and different modifiers and plugins that I might want to use. And believe it or not, I'm actually switching over to Blender, which should be awesome, and using some tools there. Hopefully some tools by friends in the Blender community, like my buddy Master Xeon. So he makes an awesome plugin called Hard Ops, which if you're really into hard surface modeling, he has a great one, and it's called Hard Ops, and the suite of tools that are inside of it are tools for Blender. You get some really awesome beveling, and also just use some of the basic poly editing tools within inside of Blender along with it. A lot of some batch processing stuff as well. So looking forward to that. Yes, and it's free. It's absolutely free. I believe it is. I'm pretty sure it is. So I did it again. I forgot to hit X. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just mirror and weld this. And it'll take the X shape and kick it back over on the other side. Now that I have X on, so let's see. Let's look at it this way perhaps for a minute. If I fill everything in black and look at some of these shapes, I think I might have to repose this knee and put the toe down a little bit. But the foot I'm just using is sort of a proxy foot. I think generally sometimes what I like to do is just redesign it all over again, using the pieces just as placeholders. And then once I have a general outline and shape, I'll come in and put other stuff. So let's bring this back up. Do that. Let's see. I'll take this guy here, and here. Ah, is it? It's very cool. But yeah, I would like to try some integrating, because I'm always you know, wanting to use like just more than one tool to do a given task sometimes, and it's always cool to, you know, up your learning game and try new things. But I'm always interested in seeing how I can tie multiple applications into a sort of a workflow, and what works best. So I'm going to try to do mostly Blender, along with ZBrush, of course, being the source of things, because I believe that ZBrush is such a great concepting tool that, like, it's really fast to just come up with shapes, and then leaving a lot of the hard more procedural work to some other apps, and then you know, just use them all together. So I'm always flipping and flopping like a marlin, you know. So I use trim dynamic, sometimes even a little bit of lazy mouse, maybe right about there. This piece, so I'm going to cut it off. Cut it. That could work. I'll flatten out a few things. So I'm going to mask off a piece really quick here. So just to give a shout out, call your pops, and happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there, from one dad to the mini out there. Alright, so I'm going to make a mask. In other words, happy Father's Day. Don't forget to call your dads. There we go. Shape that out. Maybe I might pull something and then just re-dynamesh this, give it some thickness, sort of plated look. I can even blur this a little bit as the mask. Maybe deformation and do like a polish crisp edges. Polish by features maybe. Maybe I'll relax this a little bit. There we go. And because I loosened it up, I'm going to try to do like a tiny bit of hardening. I mean, and this is just really like a rough sketch, you know. And I try to work this thing this way, and then I cut things up and I sort of shape them up. A lot of times, what I'll do is once I have a form that I like, because I've used Dynamesh and I've been pretty abusive, I haven't really worried about some of the surfacing. So I'll just take this shell of it and I'll pluck it out and ZBrush it and turn it into a shell piece. So one of the ways to do that, again, I think I've explained this in other streams, is I'll take and mask off an area like so. Okay. So I'm just going to grab the side of the leg here. It looks like it'll be a nice little cowl piece on the leg, or like a panel. And then I'll go ahead and start just hitting Control W. And what that'll do is that'll make a polygroup, and I'll just continue that on into multiple parts. Because what I can do, I'll just duplicate this really quick and try it out, is I can hide everything else and just grab the one piece, and then I will sort of like do like a split hidden or split visible, split hidden. And in this case now I have just the shell piece in there that I plucked out, but it's still really rough on the outside. So what I'll do is I'll take and believe, sorry, flipping through a couple of menus. Go to edge loop, and I'll do a group loops, which will hold a lot of the shaping on the edge, and then I'll just Z-remesh this. And when I Z-remesh it, or even sometimes without Z-remeshing it, I'll just close holes on it on the back. Sometimes things that take a hard change, like from one flat direction to another, like this edge here, this might not work as well, you know. Closing holes in the back and then maybe pushing out some geometry, like you'll get some weird shapes every once in a while. But I have had some pretty good control with doing something like this, and that's because I have a group loop around the actual shape. I'll come over to panel loop and I'll change the thickness, maybe 0.05. No polish, no bevel, 1 or 0 loops, but I think 1 should do. Oh, whoops, actually that's the wrong one. Sorry. This one should be 1 loop. My bad. And then I'll panel loop it, but I need to Z-remesh it first. Sorry. I'll do this maybe at 1.5. Or you know what? 0.5. Adaptive I can keep on, but I'll crank it up a little bit and see how it works out. So this will take a second to just Z-remesh. Oh, your last 5 things? I'm sorry. Is rendering on Maya faster than on Blender? Well, that sort of depends. I hear that Cycles itself, and I've only really started recently using Blender, but I hear Cycles is a really good render, and it's fair to say it's probably comparable to a lot of, you know, just professional use, you know, rendering systems. I've seen some people do some really awesome stuff with it. I haven't had a chance yet to really jump into it and decide that for myself, but I have had some experience using Octane a little bit, and through that you can use, there is a subscription model of Octane for Blender, and so like I'm actually moving my Maya subscription over to my Blender subscription for it, but it comes along with the standalone as well, and you can use I believe an Octane version for Blender specifically, like you would use Cycles. So if it's worth any 2 cents, I think probably Cycles is a little bit crisp. Octane is going to be like almost film quality rendering. So you know, they're both very good. The actual internal BPRs inside of ZBrush are not horrible as well. Keyshot is, of course, by its nature a little bit different, as it doesn't really use GPU speed. It uses more CPU and memory speed, I believe. In fact, I believe it's like 90% of the resources that it uses the actual CPU to do more of like a brute force render. And Cycles does take takes advantage of GTX technology. So like if you want to use CUDA cores, or the CUDA cores in your video card, probably Cycles. And of course, if you have like newer Pascal cards like 1060, 70, or 1080 cards, you're probably going to see some really good performance in something like Octane, and or Arnold or Redshift, which have been some really competing rendering systems with each other. But does that answer that 1 of 5? I should hope. Let me see. Sorry, let me scroll back up. I get drawing here and working on something, and then it gets a little bit difficult for me to answer questions because they scroll by so fast. Blender I am mostly using for modeling, poly editing to be specific, but a lot that's sort of split half and half, because in ZBrush I'm actually using a Z modeler brush quite a bit with like a Q cube or an initialized Q piece of geometry, like a Q cylinder or whatever you initialize it to be. So I'm sort of splitting the work. A lot of proxy meshes I'm making in ZBrush, and then more finite, you know, secondary and tertiary forms, I'm actually planning on doing in Blender from here out. I used to use Maya for a lot of that blending, or you know, editing, but you know, I'm not gonna use it so much for sculpting as much. And I think I have had some questions on sculpting for that. Let's see, where was I? So I'm gonna take this and do sort of like a what was I was gonna do a panel loop on it. So one loop, 0.05, no polish, bevel, no, panel loop it, and it will just give me a nice shell to work with. And then I can just edit and cut out pieces and start chopping this up as a panel. Right? So at least I have some lower geometry to work with. I think I showed you guys this maybe a couple of streams ago, but that is one of the approaches that I would probably take, especially even when I'm in concepting something, because I can non-destructively just sort of duplicate and then pluck out a shape and then shape it up on top. So like something like this, if I wanted to, I'll turn solo off, I can see how that shell pairs up, and I can sort of tailor it to fit with a little bit of work. Yeah. So next time around, I'm going to keep this sketch around, and next time around I'm actually going to continue. And let me see if I can go back and answer 3 more questions. Is that real? And don't mind if I actually ask you to ask or tell me what the other 2 were again, or what other 3 were. Best site to teach ZBrush online? Believe it or not, ZBrush Classroom is I would say the official start. Right, because and Ask ZBrush as well has a lot of really cool resources, and of course if you join or have joined the ZBrush Central community, which is like a forum for ZBrush users that's hosted by Pixelogic. In there's a lot of cool stuff to learn that, you know, sometimes in people's posts they put up sort of demo or tutorial or how I did that sort of post, but there's also the Z Classroom, which I believe Pixelogic is really good in organizing. And check out Joseph and also Paul Gabery. Their Ask ZBrush and or ZBrush Lives usually tend to do with a lot of the basics and or even up to novice and advanced techniques with ZBrush for sculpting. I would take a look at a lot of their feeds for stuff. Ask ZBrush especially, because there's some really good stuff in there. Besides, you know, there's a lot of ZBrush artists that have done demos, you know, and put them out on things like Gumroad and or YouTube. So I mean, when I remember when I was using ZBrush in the beginning, I scoured YouTube a whole lot, and I found so much information that was helpful to me. So I'd say between those 2 things, like if you don't want to you know, have the cost associated with paying for a full course, there are resources on the internet for learning, to use as learning tools. So I would definitely try that before you know, open up your wallet. But there's a lot of good stuff out there, and of course books. There's some amazing books that are actually published on ZBrush and its use. Cybex had some really good ones, like Paul's book. I still actually reference here and there, you know, even though ZBrush has changed so much in between the time that he actually had the book published, but it's still very, very relevant, especially for beginners, because it'll explain a lot as to sort of a broken down feature list of sculpting tools and, you know, pipelines as far as like readying assets for games or topology or rendering, or, you know, just basically using like curve brushes or that sort of thing. So cheers on that. On this model, I just put this model together in a few minutes, right? So again, just sort of to recap and go back, because actually I think I'm gonna have to cut it short here in just a moment. Most of this is just from a brush kit that I have built. So last stream, if you guys have a chance to go on YouTube and have a look, I started putting together, a model simply from using Fusion and ZBrush, blocking out shapes and creating sort of an insert multi-mesh, sort of a library of parts and pieces that I like commonly use or that fit within my design language. And then I've made my own personal insert multi-mesh brush out of it for kit bashing. So a lot of times, why I do this is because I'd like to keep a consistent look of shapes that I've designed myself, within a certain genre or something like that. Or I have my peculiar ways about what a mech should look like, or what mech parts should look like. And once I have all of that visual language laid out, part by part, I create an insert multi-mesh brush. So like these here, useful things like mechanical hands, or like I have one good proxy of hand that I like to use on models, or other mechanical bits like surface details, or shocks, that sort of thing, joints, shell pieces, frames you might create. And then once you have all of that language, even here again, the space pad stuff that I helped build with Jerry, you'll see that you can use these and mix and match, but within it, just so that it doesn't look Frankenstein, I suggest building a lot of your pieces yourself, and or using pieces that are similarly designed, right? So that way there's a nice transition of shapes, rather than just using something ad hoc and putting it together and hoping that the shapes work together. I mean, which sometimes can be a good experiment, but for the sake of your own creativity, putting things and designing challenging shapes for yourself, it's always nice to build your own kit, and then have a go at actually trying to apply it and build something out of it, right? So that's what I've been trying here. So it only took me a minute to put together just like a simple armature, and then I will go ahead. In fact, next time I make some time here, I'm not sure when next I'm streaming, but I literally have been meaning to record sort of a session where I go through and I build things out, and maybe do a time lapse for you guys. So next time around, hopefully I'll have a little bit more of this built, and I'll try to show you how I render it out in the next steps. And I think I'll try to do, again, similar fashion of things where I'll kick it over and generate some line art from it, and maybe try to do a paint over from something like that, using Toon Shader. Shaders inside of Keyshot or something like that, and use that as a base drawing to actually do an illustration from. Alright, so any last questions before I hop off, guys? Hey, Mike Pavlovich has a really good channel, by the way. Yes, along with that best site to teach ZBrush online, Mike has some really in-depth information on his YouTube channel. It's golden. Check it out. He's really good and very in-depth, and at a good pace where you can follow along. ZBrush modeling, how much time did it take to learn it until I was comfortable? Probably about 2 years. And I'm someone who had been traditionally like a 2D guy. I've drawn comics. Even recently, I've drawn for heavy metal a few times within the last couple of months. And so I had come from paper, ink, maybe scanning stuff, painting inside of Photoshop, and had no 3D experience to very little. In fact, I think I probably learned a little bit more of ZBrush, and then from that interest spawned into using more sophisticated modeling packages like Maya, Blender, or Max, what have you. So I mean, it's a really good entry level application to use, because it's very unconventional to a lot of other 3D packages. But yeah, definitely try it, use it, see if you can get some shapes from it. I think once a lot of people get past the difference in the interface and what have you, and you start to understand how things work inside of ZBrush as far as models, as far as like 2.5D, it gets a lot easier, and then everything starts to fall in place depending on what your workflow is. Yeah. So okay guys, I will join you in and around next time. Do keep your eyes peeled for the schedule. I would love to explain more about what I'm working on. Have yourself a wonderful Father's Day. Unfortunately today again, I had to cut it just a little bit short due to some work that I have to get done. But as always, it is a pleasure, and thank you for having me here on ZBrush Live. Cheers guys, and thanks again for joining me. Alright? And if anything you want to check out previously that was covered in this stream, I'm sure give it a moment, and I'm sure probably on YouTube it'll be fetched up. Alright? Take care, and thanks for joining me. Have a good weekend, guys. Happy Father's Day.